everybody, here's a quick overview of the features and functions of the new FretGuru XT gauge. And these basic principles could also be used with the original FretGuru gauge. So one of the core functions of the FretGuru XT gauge is going to be action measurement. And you can either use the incremental ruler here on the long edge, which measures in thousandths of an inch, or if you're a traditionalist, you could use the dedicated 64ths ruler here on the short edge. So one mistake I often see people make when measuring action on their guitar is to try to measure the action when the guitar is on its back, which will give you a false reading because the extra weight of the guitar and the string tension pulling against the neck will create a false high reading. You can probably see that with any extra weight placed on the guitar, the string action increases. So what I like to do is take whatever work mat I'm using and hang it off the edge of the bench, and that way you can take the guitar and you can put it in the playing position and get an action reading from the driver's seat, like so. And preferably you'll have a light coming directly from above so you can shine that light under the string and get a clean and clear reading of the action gauge where the increment lines meet the bottom of the string. To give you an idea of what that looks like, what you do, say in the case of the low E string, is you slide the gauge right behind the low E string and slide the gauge forward and backward till you find which increment line coincides with the bottom of the string at the 12th fret. And in this case, it seems to be the 50 thousandths mark. So what you do, if the bottom of the string coincides with the bottom of the 50 thousandths mark, that means your string action is 50 thousandths. But if the bottom of the string coincides with the top of the increment mark, which is 5 thousandths of an inch thick, that means your string action is 55 thousandths. Likewise, if you prefer to measure in 64ths, you do the same thing. You put the gauge behind the low E string at the 12th fret, find which line coincides with the bottom of the string. In this case, it's the 3/64ths mark, which the string is at the top of the 3/64ths line. So that would mean the action at the 12th fret is 3.5 64ths. How's that for a precision measurement? The one feature on the FretGuru gauge that we get the most questions about is the thin corner, which is the nut slot height and depth gauge. This is engineered to be a little less than half the thickness of the rest of the gauge, basically 9.5 thousandths thick, so it can fit into the thinnest nut slot, which is typically 10 thousandths. This feature is actually super simple to use. All you do is you place the thin corner into the bottom of each nut slot and bridge over to the 2nd fret, which allows you to check the gap as the gauge passes over the 1st fret. And it might be a bit counterintuitive. You may think that you want the bottom of your nut slots to be equal to the height of a fret, if there were a fret in place of the nut here, but you actually want them to be a bit taller and incrementally decreasing as it goes from the bass side to the treble side, to where the treble side, the high E string, might be only 2 thousandths taller, 2 thousandths of an inch taller than the fret itself. You can use this to check or dial in an existing guitar nut or to fabricate a new nut. And since I know this guitar is a bit on the low side from the factory, I've gone ahead and made it easy and set up a 3 thousandths, a 4 thousandths, and a 5 thousandths feeler gauge. And what I'll usually do is come in from behind, starting with the smaller feeler gauge, the 3 thousandths, and there's no drag at all. Switching to the 4 thousandths, there's just the slightest bit of drag, and now switching to the 5 thousandths, there's definitely drag, and it's dragging the gauge all over the place. So I'll switch back to the 4, and from what I can tell, this gap is about 4.5 thousandths of an inch. Now these specs represent a good safe target to shoot for, and what I recommend doing is stopping just short of the low end of the range, and then circling back and forth between relief and saddle height to zero in on your ideal setup before chasing those final few thousandths of an inch. And one thing you'll notice is that the G string, say the wound G on an acoustic guitar, will usually be slightly lower than the plain G string on an electric guitar. But other than that, they're fairly similar, with the acoustic guitar being slightly higher just based on the gauge of the strings. Next up is the FretGuru exclusive fret height and fretwear gauge, which has long been a favorite of busy guitar shops and luthiers because the moment a customer walks through the door, this allows them to determine just how deep the fretwear is and whether the frets need to be replaced or whether they have another level crown and polish in them. And this is also a great tool to bring with you if you're guitar shopping. That way you instantly know what fret size the guitar you're looking at has. Before I run through the best way to use the fret height and fretwear gauge, I wanted to highlight a key improvement we've been able to make between the FretGuru XT gauge and the original FretGuru 2 gauge by utilizing the larger format on the new gauge. Now, we were able to pack a huge amount of function into such a compact tool, but just based on the limitations in the real estate we had to work with, we had to make the fret height and fretwear gauge a continuous arc. And what that means is that when you're measuring a fret, you need to pay close attention to whether either side of the notch for each fretwear gauge is planted on the fingerboard wood, so you get an accurate reading. Whereas with the new FretGuru XT gauge, with the expanded format and the extra real estate that gives us to work with, we were able to spread apart each fretwear notch and add a flat spot on either side, which gives it a very tactile feel. You can actually use it with your eyes closed and feel the fret notches working and feel them planted on either side of the fret. You can actually hear them working. I'll show you the best way to use the fret height and fretwear gauge. As you can see, this guitar has some pretty significant fretwear, but these frets started out pretty tall, probably around 55 or 57 thousandths of an inch tall, so there should be still plenty of meat left over to do another fret level on it. So the best way is to start with the largest fret notch that you know is going to be too large. And as you can see, the gauge is planted on either side of the fret, and there's still a little bit of air gap visible above the fretwear groove. So I'll shift down to the next smaller notch, and the gauge is still planted on either side of the fret, but I'm not able to see any gap between the gauge and the bottom of the fretwear groove. So I'll shift to the next smaller notch, and even though I'm in the deepest part of the fretwear groove, I can see that the gauge is rocking and the gauge is not planted on either side of the fret. So I'll back up one notch, make sure I'm right in the center of the fretwear groove, and this shows that the bottom of the fretwear groove is exactly 50 thousandths of an inch. The other big news, and this is a direct benefit of the extra real estate that we now have to work with, the new XT gauge now has an ultra-precision 4-sided fret rocker, which will allow you to seamlessly check for any high frets from the 1st fret up to the 24th fret and beyond. And since we're focused on the fret rocker sides, it would be a crime to overlook the unbelievably exquisite CNC machining and the polishing that goes into the edges. But if you were holding an XT gauge in your hands, you'd marvel at just how silky smooth and polished the edges feel. To create each XT gauge, the edges go through no less than 45 steps. We're talking 45 separate moves, either by CNC machine or by hand. Each edge is actually diamond honed and polished with the same diamond material, usually reserved for precision optics such as microscope and telescope lenses. Compare that to the usual import string action gauge, which is actually just a repurposed metal business card, with all the accuracy and attention to detail you'd expect from a metal business card. All of those would be lucky to get a quick hit on a belt sander, if anything at all, and they're definitely not smooth or precision. You'll also notice the thickness and the weight. It's quite a difference from the flimsy material that most other gauges are made of. The XT gauge is nearly 40% thicker than our original FretGuru 2 gauge, and in some cases as much as 70.6% thicker than competitors' metal business cards. And to be totally clear, we were so satisfied with the stability, function, and feel of the thicker material that we now make all of our gauges this way. So the rest of the features should be pretty much self-explanatory, such as the depth gauge, which can measure in inches and metric, and is also super handy for measuring things such as saddle slot depths. There's also the exquisitely machined hang hole, allowing you to keep the gauge within easy reach at all times. Yet there's one final feature that really deserves the spotlight, and when collaborating with top luthiers from around the world, we asked them, what should the new premium extra real estate on the new XT gauge be used for? The most common request was a simple way to measure bridge and pickup spacing, which has never actually existed before. This includes specs from vintage and modern guitars, as well as acoustic guitars and everything in between. So there you have it. If your goal is to quickly evaluate your guitar and get the most precise and dialed-in setup possible, then I'm confident the FretGuru XT gauge will become one of the most reached-for tools on your luthier's workbench. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the like button. Also be sure you're subscribed over at FretGuru.com so I can give you a heads up when we have more groundbreaking new tools and in-depth tutorials ready.